All right. We are here and we are ready to begin. Thank you to everybody that is joining us. So it's 12 o'clock on the dot Eastern Standard Time, and we are going to get right into it. We have um, a very prestigious guest here, and we're going to get into introductions and get right started. My name is Kate Assetti. I am the Senior Account Manager here at Interprenet. We are a language service provider based in Chicago. And with us, we have Vice President of CTI's Justice Division, Adam Lafredo. Adam has more than 25 years experience in the industry. Adam, thank you so much for being with us here.
Oh, no, it's great to be here. I think it's a great topic.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I want to give the people some value right away. One of the things that we want to know is what are some of the biggest tech issues that you see with your court clients that they're facing presently?
And I think it's really good to bring it back to interpreting because what we look at in a courtroom is the audience, right? What their participation is. Are they going to have two-way feedback? And I think interpretation really brings in that dynamic of who the participant is. Is it for instance, the witness, plaintiff, defense, so where they're sitting in the room. Is it over video or just audio? If it's video, that's included for things like sign language. We have to look at display technology. Do they have to interact with the court in conversation? Or is it someone that's limited English proficiency that just might need an additional bonus to having the correct verbiage? And that could be someone in the juror box. Maybe they don't have to interact. So one of the things that we look at with technology is, can everybody see each other well? Can everybody hear each other well, whether they're remote or in room? And then we look at protocols and really to know what the process is. Like I explained before, are they a participant in the courtroom? So if they get something translated to them in their native language and it has to be translated back to the court so everybody in the courtroom can hear in English, how do we accomplish that with the technology?
Mhm.
So that kind of gives you an example how the technology can really play a factor based on the participation of the participant in the courtroom.
Hugely, a huge factor. Can you give us an example of a recent solution that you implemented for a client with this real issue?
Well, what's funny, a couple months ago, we did have a customer that went out and purchased a Zoom cart, right?
Okay.
It was
For
standalone.
those that are not familiar, can
Yep.
you elaborate on what a Zoom cart is?
Absolutely. A Zoom card is really just a way to do video conferencing with some of the technology built in. It has camera, microphone, and speakers, has a large screen display. And the thought process of these were made for rooms, not necessarily courtrooms. So courts are high tech users, as I always describe them, but they're solving one pain point at a time. Right. So I had this cart that was able to do Zoom video conferencing, which is great, but they almost got in a little bit of hot water when they were having a sidebar conversation and they
Mhm.
forgot to mute the microphone on the Zoom card. Luckily, the person that was on the other end of that call said, "Hey, I can still hear you when you're doing this private conversation." So they were able to mute. And that's where we kind of came in with the technology part. And that's how we make sure that we handle process, like all of those little side technologies that are
Mhm.
working in the background. Make sure that they follow the protocol, that when you do a sidebar, that muting automatically happens in the right location, assisted listening, etc.
Thank you. And for those that are not familiar with a sidebar, right, that's a private conversation that's happening. It's not supposed to be captured on the official record. Um,
It's
so,
actually captured on the official record,
ah,
but the jury and the gallery or people in the public aren't supposed to hear that because that can be used later in an appeal.
okay. Thank you for that clarification. What are some of the things that you do to educate court clients, actual court personnel, court technology parties? I see that we have a couple in here. I saw some parties that are joined. So thank you for being here. By the way, we want to hear from you because this is an open forum. So type in the chat any comments that you have, issues that you've experienced, any feedback that you have, because we want this to be collaborative. But Adam, to the question regarding how you educate court clients about technology in their settings, what are some key takeaways in terms of setting up technology? Because it's not all the same. It's not a one size fits all, right? For each courtroom, each setting. But what are the main points that are most important when you're educating courts on how to implement technology within their settings?
I think the first step is helping them realize what their pain points are. They know what they are. Sometimes it's readdressing what challenges they have. We talk about the room and the dynamics of a room. As I said, some people are participants, some people are inactive people that might be like gallery that are just listening
Hmm.
versus being proactive. So we talk about that. We talk about where we're placing, who needs to be heard, where do we need microphones, right? So they can be heard in room and other places like far end video, and then putting displays in the right location. Who are the participants that are going to be looking at displays? Where do they need to be placed? How big they need to be in proximity. So we're covering these areas. We should really start with the fundamentals, because like I always tell everybody, courts are actually big technology users.
Hmm.
They tend to solve things in a disparate manner because they're solving one problem at a time. And it takes a good audiovisual integrator that really kind of says, hey, we can tie a lot of this technology in together. That way, you're not skipping a process and accidentally something slipping through the cracks because you're solving one problem.
Yes, absolutely. And I had a comment on that, but just looking at the chat while we're seeing the participants here. So James Hampton, you are on mute, so you do have to add any question or comment that you have in the chat. So if you do have comments or you want to participate, just put it in the chat and we'll read it out loud or share it on screen. But you put up an interesting comment about screens in room, right? And this is actually something that I've just encountered recently for a court that I work with in Illinois. Um, if people are not familiar, communication access real time translation, or CART, is typed out English typically, that's written out for a deaf party that does not use sign language to communicate. And if your screens are not setting the font the correct size, or they're not large enough, or they're not placed in an opportune location within the courtroom for a deaf individual to view that, it can be really problematic, right? So it's really important that we look at that and see at all the different scenarios of where accessibility, language access can impact one, a person's hearing, and their access to justice, right? So I think those are important things. Adam, you were on track to say, to continue with what you were talking about in how you educate the courts. But can we talk about a little bit more what some of the implications are for when courts don't have the right setup, right? Either they don't have the budget for it, they don't know how to implement it, they don't have an integrator like CTI to help them do that. So, how do we get them to set that up, and what are the implications when they don't?
Well, one of the best, kind of education tools that I use to explain that to the courts with technology that's not integrated. Um, Assisted listening systems are actually mandated federally for every court, even if they don't have the what we call the typical PA system, speakers in the room where people can speak on the microphones and you can hear it all throughout the room.
Okay.
On the federal version, federal laws, you actually have to provide in every courtroom assisted listening, whether you have that technology or not. Right.
Hmm.
What that has led some courts to do in the past is they would be by the ones that are as seen on TV. And what they really are is an audio amplifier. So it's basically a microphone that can pick things up at a large distance. Right. This goes back to not setting up properly. So let's say you handed that out to a juror member that was hard of hearing, and you pass that out to them, and it's not interconnected with the system. When that happens, and you have what we talked about before, the sidebar, which is for the record, it's an argument between whether admitting evidence or something else that might be critical to the case. The judge makes a ruling. That record is captured. So if there is an appeal, that could be one of the reasons why the party is going for an appeal. The juror is not supposed to hear that. But if they have that ALS system that isn't interconnected and can't be muted, but can pick up wide areas of audio by turning up the volume,
Hmm.
they have just heard what happened in that conversation. So that's one of the consequences, and we kind of mentioned it a couple different ways. That's one of the consequences of not having the right technology set up. The second is kind of how you spoke about it when you're talking about the CART application and having the overlay of the language on the device for someone who's hard of hearing. Well, if that isn't part of the conversation, where the displays are located might be a moot point. I said one time as a juror, sometimes you get into that group think and you won't say something even if you can't see something. So someone puts something on a display, if you can't see it, you're nodding like you can, and that's just part of that group think, that you don't want to be the person that's speaking out in this formal environment. So the planning is actually kind of critical, that if you're going to spend money on technology, making sure you have some of those things covered, or at least the plan to get that done in the future.
Absolutely. I think from our perspective, because we are supporting with language access for those with language barriers, those with a disability, right? It's daunting to go to court for anybody. But if you don't have the right access and are not able to communicate and understand in your own language, I mean, it makes it that much more prohibitive. So with that, we do have some questions that came in prior to, and I'm going to ask them. And I'd like for this particular question, for our interpreters that are logged on. I see one of them here to answer in the chat, right? So, what are some of the greatest challenges that interpreters face when appearing remotely, whether that's in a court session, first appearance, whatever it is? But when you're interpreting, live in a courtroom, what are some of the biggest challenges you face? So I see Victoria here. I'm going to call you out. Put your answer in the chat. I did talk to some of our in-house staff interpreters, right? So audio could be an issue. It could be user error. There are a lot of courts who are not oriented on how to use technology, right? They haven't had the appropriate orientation on how it should function. They haven't tested it out. So a lot of the time user error can be a challenge, right? And really who ends up, at the detriment of that is the defendant in this case. So if they're not able to hear and understand, they might not have access to all of their rights. They might not even know their rights, and they might not have a fair proceeding. So, if you're an interpreter here, I want to hear from you. What are some of the biggest challenges that you experience as an interpreter and reporting remotely, whether it's via Zoom, WebEx, regardless of the technology? What are some of the challenges that you face? And while we're waiting for the interpreters, Adam, to chime in their 2 cents in the chat here, I'd love to hear from you about, how can we enhance access for those that, with this technology? How can we enhance the experience, and how can we ensure, one, better outcomes for the courts, and two, how can we provide better value in general, just a better experience overall? So from a technology perspective, what do you think?
And I think that's a really big question. I think, working with you, talking to you, and knowing Interprenet, I learned quite a bit on there's only a certain number of languages that have court certified interpreters, and there is really a finite amount of certified court interpreters. And I don't
Hmm.
know if the complete industry understands that, but I think video helps bring that into play, where at least you get more options.
Hmm.
It doesn't always have to be done in room.
Yeah.
I know that process is increasing quite a bit, and I think the next level really goes to the continued development of these platforms like Zoom and WebEx and Teams to integrate third party. It also kind of is incumbent on companies like myself to educate the customer with that platform, Zoom, Teams, WebEx, on how to use the remote interpretation capability. And that comes from both the AV integration side and the interpreting side, from your group, to help educate the customers, to make sure the secondary thing is we make sure they test the systems, that they understand how they work in there, because many of these cases, if you kind of explained before, some
Hmm.
are 10 or 15-minute proceeding that happens so quickly that if it doesn't work for a couple minutes, it might throw the whole day off, right?
Yeah.
Um, so I think that is not only one of the biggest benefits that's been happening over the last 5 years, when you get these more household type of video conferencing systems that anybody can do from anywhere.
Hmm.
Um, I think it has given a lot more access to what the capabilities are there, to give more access to language in this means. But also in the room is having the right devices, the right interconnects. We talked about assisted listening systems. Most of those have a second channel. So if you do put one in your court, you can add a wireless microphone with the right technology, and you can have an in-room interpreter that can talk and address the court and also address their client with that language. There's also portable devices that if you're going to keep it completely separate, and the interpreters in the room. So those are some of the things that I really look at about where we're going with the technology, but really how to get the courts to utilize it even more efficiently.
Absolutely. And actually, you bring up a really good point about, just accessibility in general and just the expanse, right? So you're right. Interpreters, there is a limited pool of certified interpreters. And when I previously worked in more operations on the operations side of things, I used to talk to attorneys and judges and coordinators all the time. And it was really kind of not baffling, but interesting in a way because they would say, well, I just need a certified interpreter. Okay. Well, you need a certified interpreter for an IME, which is a medical exam. Does it have to be a certified interpreter? And they were like, well, there's just one certification, right? No, there's not. To be a professional interpreter, there are many different certification routes you can take. However, to interpret within the court system, you have to be registered, qualified, or certified within the AOC or AOIC, depending upon which state. It's run and governed state by state. So for those that don't know, it's a three-step process that interpreters have to go through. They do sight translation testing, they do simultaneous interpretation testing, and proficiency evaluations. So they have to prove that they are proficient in their language. They've been oriented on the court one decorum within the courtroom and how to address certain things, court terminology, and there is a very limited pool state by state. So with um, with states like Texas, for example, they often don't work with consortium, which means that they don't use interpreters certified outside of the state of Texas. Um, it limits the pool, right? We only might have 50 Spanish certified interpreters, and then maybe a handful of Mandarin, a handful of Vietnamese. Other languages are not tested, right? They don't have the testing capability, so the interpreters prove their proficiency, but maybe they don't have the wherewithal, or it's not available to them to test out in their language if it's a language of lesser diffusion. So it's really interesting. But what InterpreNet has been doing and driving home with a lot of the courts that we work with is utilizing the national pool of interpreters certified within their state or within the consortium, and opening up that pool, right? Interpreters don't have to log or come in to an on site location. They can log directly into a link, interpret for a judge for a proceeding for as long as needed, if it's multiple hearings at once or if it's just one. If there are multiple courtrooms that need interpreting, right, they can jump from one session to another. And so it opens up this pool. So before, where we had interpreters maybe driving 50, 100 miles to get to a court, interpreting for 15 minutes and then leaving, it opens up this opportunity for them to support more hearings that require support. And they don't have that lag time of driving, the logistics of all of that. So it does open up, remote interpretation does open up quite a bit. And I see that Victoria has a comment here regarding experience. Let me see here. It says, in your experience so far, like it happened in the screens of CART, what are the most overlooked pieces of courtroom tech that directly impact interpreter performance? Well, um, from my experience and what I see, not as a professional linguist, but someone who's helping to support and integrate that, I think a lot of things factor in, right? And interpreter performance can be impacted by poor audio quality. If somebody's not using something simple as a headset, right? Using a microphone and headset, and their audio is warbled, muffled, really difficult to hear. That can be really challenging for a sign language interpreter who's voicing for someone, right? Having a good visual of the court proceeding itself and the defendant or party who is deaf or hard of hearing. Second comment from Victoria says, biggest challenge for interpreters not having good audio, which is right what I said. Video, seeing what's going on in the room, it makes it very hard, and not being able to follow the nonverbal cues, which is hugely important. So even for spoken languages, having a video feed live really helps impact and improve the quality of interpretation when an interpreter is interpreting remotely. Let me see here. So if anybody has any other comments, any other interpreters there, they want to chime in, please, 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 please share your comments, your thoughts.
Well,
Um,
I have some additions to kind of what Victoria's second comment was about
please,
audio video.
absolutely.
Um, And this is where it goes to like to the portable devices. If you have a cart with one camera,
Hmm.
one display, one array microphone that might be picking people up from 20, 30 feet away, and that's your interpreting video conferencing system. You have people that might not be able to see the display too well. You have cameras only picking up a really wide angle. You have one microphone, so the furthest away people are harder to hear. So these are all the things that we have to look at if we're going to use interpreting. One of the other things I think is something I've learned over the years is simultaneous versus consecutive.
Mm.
Not that I didn't know the difference, but not being a bilingual person myself, I didn't understand that there's another additional skill set. So, besides being court certified, the people that have that great skill set to be able to simultaneously interpret is actually a pretty important skill set. And there's even a limited more number of those people that are available that have that skill set. So I thought that was really interesting. And that affects the way the court process works. If you have someone in there that is, if you're doing consecutive interpreting, it makes you have to take your time, right? It's helping the courts understand, or it could be the parties. The courts probably know it, but sometimes the parties don't, that you have to give time with each of your questions or your responses in that consecutive level. But
Yes.
now it still can be solved with a court certified interpreter if you're doing it over video.
Absolutely. For those of the participants that are on that don't know the difference between simultaneous interpretation and consecutive, obviously, the interpreter pauses to wait for the person to respond and then interprets that into English and so on. So it creates this additional time, right? It can lengthen a proceeding if we're not using simultaneous. However, I will say, especially if you have an interpreter reporting remotely, you need to have the appropriate technology set up to be able to conduct a hearing with simultaneous interpretation to avoid feedback, right? To make sure that all the appropriate parties that are listening to interpretation hear it without any reverberations, any feedback. So it's really important that that's set up on the front end or the back end. It's really important that that's set up well and tested ahead of utilizing simultaneous interpretation. Any other thoughts or comments from you, Adam? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off earlier.
Oh, no, it's okay. I think it's going pretty well. Any additional questions that you might have that I can kind of answer to tie back again into, all of this technology really goes back to having the right people hear what they need to hear, see what they need to see, setting it up in the location. A courtroom has multiple different areas that you have to cover, and you have lots of different, what we call kind of participants in a court.
Mhm,
Um, so I think that those are all big factors where people are sitting, what their role is in the court, and why they may or may not be able to hear something or see something during a certain period of time for evidence and audio, all those things combined.
mhm. And so, what are some reasons that courts might choose not to install technology or not to enhance their audiovisual setup?
Yeah, I think the biggest factor is most state court systems are there's state provided judges, but most of the time it's the county that is funding the technology.
Hmm.
Right. And there's a discrepancy with being able to bring that information to your county level and convince them that these dollars need to be spent in these areas. Right. So a lot of it comes down to budget. The good news is we've really made a transformation in our court systems, and it was really needed. COVID kind of pushed us to the level where we needed to look at video in order to handle the expediency, get less people in the room, being able to bring in stuff like language access remotely and do all these things remotely. So when you get to the video conference level, like we talked about, you have to have cameras in the right location, displays in the right location, and microphones where people can hear each other. So you actually had to backwards solve for a lot of that. So that's kind of the good portion to all this. It's brought a lot of courts up to technology, or at least understanding of it. There's still a lot of courts that actually need the technology, and I think different calendars could use it in different ways,
Hmm.
which is really important, like family courts or juvenile courts, or even specialty courts, veteran courts, those kinds of things. So technology really plays um, a really good role once the courts, and also when we talk about counties, understand the pain points that we are solving.
Yes. Well, one of the things that I've done just on my side with one of my clients is that we initiated a pilot. We had a court that had an extreme need, and when I say extreme, it's just a diverse need, right? They had a lot of hearings that required support, whether it was defendants that were appearing from jail, first time appearances. They just had a very diverse population, but the problem was, like you said, the budget, right? They really had a challenge in implementing the support that they needed to be able to enable remote interpretation access. One, pool of in person resources was really limited. And two, they needed more languages just available to them. So, one of the things that we've done is done a pilot for them. We implemented a pilot, we tested their technology, we met with their team and said, okay, this is what we're going to do. Maybe we're not going to implement this in all of your courtrooms, but we're going to start here in this criminal court and in this family court or civil court, and then we can pilot this and see how it goes. And then later down the road, as we're looking at budgets and expenditures for you and you're planning for this, we can rate the success, benchmark it, and see, okay, how much money were you able to save by implementing remote, by utilizing this technology? And how much money does it save you in the long term, right? So that's something to think about. I think sometimes there's a lot of red tape. We know when we're dealing with state or county funded budgets, when we're trying to implement solutions, right? So a lot of that is really impactful, but a pilot might help. Victoria has a question for you, Adam. Do you have any success stories where tech directly improved language access or ADA compliance?
Oh, I mean, that's one of the constants, especially with ADA compliance. E- it is one of those technologies that, if done right, if you put the technology in each room, those headsets can be dual purpose for language access. So if you have an interpreter in the room to any of these courtrooms that have that technology already implemented, like I said, you can tie in a wireless microphone, and now they're able to interpret at a quiet level, but still be able to address the court when necessary by a regular microphone. So that's just a great way to utilize mandatory technology and make it actually enhance other challenges that you may have, other pain points. Um, so I think when we talk about that as a whole, that's one of the counterparts that even though it's a different type of need, assisted listening versus language access, right?
Hmm.
Those two actually can play really well together because you can also use that technology a little bit in the courtrooms, even for remote type technology. Um, so that's been more of a consistent over the last couple of years and has helped advance both of those levels.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. We have about 3 minutes left before we close out our open forum. Thank you for all the participants who provided your feedback and your questions. On the screen now, you can actually see there are our email addresses included here. So if you have questions specific to technology within the courts or implementation of technology, you can contact Adam directly. If you have questions for me about language access, I'd be happy to support you. Just send me an email. You can reach out to me. For any of those of you that are watching this recording, we are going to do many, many more of these kinds of open forums. We might play with the format a little bit, but we want to have more conversational type of discussions where we're talking about the issues and challenges that we're seeing. And also, if you have suggestions about challenges that you face personally within technology, within your sector, language access, and you have suggestions for another subject for one of these open forums, please send it my way. And I would love to hear your feedback about what you would like to see. So feel free to email us there. Thank you so much. I don't have any closing thoughts, but Adam, I'd love to, know if you have any closing thoughts. You have so much experience and knowledge within the subject. Anything you want to share or offer to our audience here.
Absolutely. What I always try to say is, just reach out when you have good people in good industries like interpreting or audiovisual. We really like to help our end users. In this case, it's sports, but at the end of the day, it's also helping their end users. So that's kind of the neat thing is by us as technologists doing a great job for the courts, for instance, it's also doing it for their end users, which are the customers that are coming in and saying they need language access or they need technology to make something happen better.
Absolutely. And that's our end goal, right? Our end goal is to make sure that there is access to justice without language barriers. The end goal is to ensure that there is no challenge, right? So thank you, Adam, for your time. We're just at the 30-minute mark here. Thank you to all the participants who joined us. We really appreciate you, and I hope everybody has a great day. Thanks,
All right.
everybody.
Thank you, Kate.
Thank you.